Everyone said he was guilty. The judge, the prosecutor, the press, the neighbors, even his own friends. When the gavel struck and the sentence was read, there were even those who applauded at the back of the courtroom. The city wanted justice, and at that moment it seemed satisfied. But no one noticed the cruelest detail of this story. The only person who could have saved that young man was already dead. And what she had to say was locked away in a forgotten letter, in silence, until it was too late. This is the kind of mortal secret that not only destroys lives but exposes the darkest side of the human mind and the system that should protect it. Imagine being accused of something you didn't do and still seeing the whole world close its eyes to the truth. It's hard to believe, but stories like this happen more often than we think. The difference is that this time there was a piece of paper with words from the victim. Words that could have changed everything. But they arrived when the cell was already locked and the soul marked forever. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you and perhaps make you question how much we truly trust in justice. He was young, soft-spoken, with no criminal record, but unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The tragedy happened, panic spread, and the frightened city needed someone to blame, someone to point a finger at, to ease the collective fear. It didn't matter if the evidence was weak, if the accounts were confusing, or if the details didn't match. It just had to seem plausible. After all, in everyone's mind, he already looked like a criminal. And so in less than a month, a verdict was sealed. No chances, no escape. Have you ever been through something like this? Being judged even before you open your mouth? Being seen as something you never were? In this case, criminal psychology helps us understand why. Cognitive biases, social pressures, and the devastating effect of what is called confirmation bias, where people only see what they want to see. The truth. It had no space in that courtroom, only the narrative that everyone accepted as convenient, and the victim, who could have told a different story, was silenced by her own death, or at least that's what everyone thought. But what if I told you that she tried to speak, that before she died, she wrote something, a message that was never delivered, a confession? Swallowed by the system, this letter existed, and it changed everything. But when it finally came to light years later, the damage was already done. A life had been destroyed, and the worst part, no one wanted to take responsibility for the mistake. No one wanted to listen. What this story reveals about human behavior, about how we judge, how we act in groups, how we choose to believe in certain truths, is disturbing, and at the same time, necessary. Because understanding how these distortions happen is the first step to preventing other innocents from being swallowed by a myopic and emotional justice. And while you follow this story, I want to extend a sincere invitation to you. If at a moment this touches you, sparks a memory, a doubt, or even a silent outrage, leave a comment here. Talk to me. Talk to the community that forms around these real and often forgotten stories. Because every account, every opinion, every perspective shared down here not only strengthens the conversation, but helps keep the search for justice alive, even when it comes too late. If this theme has touched you in any way, like this video, it may seem like a small gesture, but it helps the platform understand that this message needs to reach more people, people who may never have heard what really happens behind the scenes of public judgment, people who also deserve to hear the other side of the story. And of course, subscribe to the channel, not only to continue receiving content like this, but to be part of a space where we refuse to accept easy answers. Here, we question, investigate, and give voice to those who have been silenced. Your presence here matters, and more than that, it transforms this content into something that goes beyond the screen. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next may change the way you see not just this case, but all the hasty judgments we encounter out there. He entered the courtroom with hunched shoulders, a lowered gaze, almost apologizing for his existence. No confrontational gestures, no words out of place. But curiously, that was what bothered people the most, because for most, those who are innocent tend to rebel. They raise their voices, protest, shout, and he did none of that. His silence was interpreted as guilt. His calm demeanor became coldness. His restraint turned into deceit. It's fascinating how our collective mindset creates invisible patterns of behavior, and those who don't fit become suspects. The truth is, he wasn't a well-known face. He didn't have an influential family, nor important friends. He was just another kid from the outskirts, with a difficult background raised by his grandparents, with a past marked by abandonment and petty offenses. Nothing violent, nothing cruel, but enough to plant the seeds of prejudice. And when his name emerged as a suspect, the narrative fit perfectly with what the city expected. Not because he was guilty, but because it was convenient for him to sabotage. Because the people's fear demanded a quick resolution, a face, a name, a guilty party that would leave no room for doubt. Behind the scenes of this trial, there was much more than evidence. There were assumptions, biased looks, and a collective desire to rid themselves of the discomfort. And when emotion takes the place of reason, justice becomes a theater stage, where the accused, even if he hasn't spoken, is condemned by his appearance. That's what happened there. A boy with a complicated history who didn't know how to defend himself and who reacted in a wrong way for the expected emotional standard. The result? He began to be seen as someone cold, capable, dangerous, even when there was no solid evidence, none. This is the point where human behavior shows its cruelest side. We don't judge just with our eyes, but with everything we carry. Our fears, past experiences, stereotypes. And this mix creates decisions that seem logical, but are deeply contaminated by a hidden truth, the desire to simplify chaos. To turn something complex into an easy-to-accept narrative. The problem is that in this process, we destroy people, and we don't even notice, because there's a question that won't go away. Why didn't he ever truly try to defend himself? Why, even with everything against him, didn't he shout his innocence? At this point, his psychological profile starts to reveal more than any testimony could show. Comment below. I understood the weight of silence. The night of the crime seemed written for a poorly resolved tragedy script. Light rain, deserted. Streets, a secluded house, and an anonymous call reporting muffled screams from inside. When the police arrived, they found the young woman's body on the living room floor and the scene set up like an incomplete puzzle. There was blood, yes, but not in the expected proportions, not in the coherent directions. Some drawers were overturned, but nothing had been taken, no clear sign of a break-in. And the strangest part, the lock was intact, as if whoever entered already had the key. The first hours of the investigation were a whirlwind of speculation. Close friends were interviewed, neighbors reported noises, but none could piece together a consistent timeline. The times mixed, the details diverged. One witness said she saw the accused on the street that night. Another claimed he was at home with his grandmother. No camera footage, no concrete evidence linking him to the scene. But even so, something began to form, a narrative. And when a story makes emotional sense, it grows on its own, fed by the emotions of those searching for answers. However, there were elements that never quite added up. The timeline, for example, was unstable. The forensic evidence indicated that the crime occurred around 11 p.m. But the messages on the victim's cell phone showed that she was still active shortly after midnight. The mark of the alleged weapon did not correspond to the cut. And the forensic experts found hair strands that didn't belong to her, nor to him. Still, these details were ignored or downplayed because by that time, public opinion had already chosen a culprit. And going against that meant rowing against a dangerous tide. This rush to find an answer has a devastating impact. It not only compromises justice, but creates invisible wounds in society itself. The need to close the case quickly, to present results, overshadowed the real quest for truth. The pressure from the media, the outcry on social media, the editorials, demanding action. All of this pushed investigators onto a path where discovering who did it was no longer as important as presenting someone who could have done it. And that detail changes everything. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because there's something that few people realize. The victim's behavior in the hours leading up to the crime can reveal much about what really happened, and about who she truly feared. Write in the comments, haste can also be dangerous. At that time, the city was breathing tension. It wasn't just the crime itself, but the fear it spread like a dense smoke in the alleys, in the squares. In conversations between neighbors, the feeling of insecurity took over every space. It was as if, at any moment, something bad could happen again. And when the sensation of danger settles in, the urgency for an answer becomes a collective obsession. The community didn't just want justice, they wanted relief. They wanted someone to say, "It's resolved, it's under control." Even though deep down everything was far from being resolved, the media dove headfirst into the case. Alarmist headlines, photos exploited without shame, emotional interviews with the relatives of the victim, and security experts giving their opinions in grave and assertive tones. It was the perfect dish to feed the drama. A young woman murdered, a mysterious alleged boyfriend, silence, tension, and the infamous letter whose existence was uncertain. With this, the narrative gears began to turn. Soon, the accused became the villain. Not because the evidence showed this, but because the script needed an antagonist and he fulfilled all the requirements. The pressure on the investigators was brutal. With each passing day without an arrest, the noise grew louder. The press demanded action, local politicians demanded answers, and the public wanted a face on television. The consequence? A results-driven mentality, where the focus shifted from truth to convenience. Everything needed to happen quickly, as if speed validated efficiency. But this haste comes at a price, and in this case, the price was a potential injustice, silent, cruel, and devastating. Behind the scenes of the system, decisions began to be made based on assumptions, not facts. Reports were ignored, narratives were molded, and anything that contradicted the main theory was seen as noise. No one wanted to complicate what was already resolved. And that's precisely where the danger lies, when the need to provide an answer outweighs the commitment to truth. When the narrative takes precedence over the investigation, and the outcome becomes just a poorly placed period at the end of a story that still had many blank pages. There is a key piece that was forgotten amid the chaos, the victim's note. A message that was trapped in time, and it was only read when the silence had already wreaked irreversible havoc. The victim didn't have time to scream for help. But she left something more powerful than any scream. Handwritten words, hurried, emotional, and bearing a weight that no one understood at the moment. A note. A small piece of paper folded 3 times, hidden inside an old book that would only be handled years later by chance. She wrote that just before the end, as if she knew something was coming, or perhaps as a request for protection, an attempt to ensure that, even if she didn't survive, her version of the facts wouldn't disappear with her. The problem is, it did vanish. Throughout the entire investigation, no one mentioned the existence of that note. Not even the close relatives were aware. The police never collected it as evidence. It didn't appear in reports, nor was it mentioned by witnesses. It was as if it had never existed. And because of that, the verdict was built on an incomplete foundation. The content of that message could have altered the entire trial journey, but it remained silent, forgotten among yellowed pages, like an echo locked in time. What's most unsettling is that when the note finally came to light, it not only exonerated the accused, it revealed fear. Not of the young man who was arrested, but of someone else, someone who was never investigated. The text was short yet direct. "If something happens to me, don't let them blame him. I know who is capable." This simple, devastating sentence changed everything for those who read it. But at the same time, it changed nothing for the system, which had already moved on. Time had passed, the case was closed, and the truth archived along with it. The revelation of the note was not received with enthusiasm as a breakthrough. On the contrary, it was treated with embarrassment, as if reopening a wound that everyone was pretending not to see anymore. No authority acknowledged the mistake. No new investigation was opened. The system preferred to silence it again, as if facing its own failure was more dangerous than maintaining a convenient lie. This is the cruelest part. When the truth appears, Too late, and no one has the courage to turn back. Now I want to dive even deeper into this issue, because the discovery of that note opened the door to an even more disturbing question. Why was it ignored when it finally came to light? What is the interest behind the silence that persisted, even with the truth in hand? Comment below. I would have read the note. The impact of the letter was like a silent explosion. No one heard the sound, but the cracks spread in all directions. When it emerged, there were no microphones on, no cameras rolling, or headlines plastering faces. All that remained was the paper, worn by time, and the trembling handwriting of the victim stating, without beating around the bush, that the condemned man was not the culprit. The confession was clear. She pleaded, almost begging, that they not place his name as responsible for her death. And yet the letter was never read in court. It never became part of the process. It never reached the ears of those who decided the fate of a life. This raises an uncomfortable question. Why was such a crucial document kept off the record? The answer, like almost everything in this case, lies behind the scenes. The person who first found the letter was a distant relative who had inherited some belongings of the victim, and out of respect, kept the contents unopened. For years it remained sealed among old photos and forgotten mementos, until one day, out of pure curiosity, that envelope was opened. And it was in that moment that the constructed narrative crumbled. There was the name of another person. There was the fear, the anguish, and the desperate attempt to protect someone she knew could be unjustly accused. But what came next was even more unsettling. Instead of acting urgently, those who had access to the letter hesitated. They consulted lawyers, sought advice, feared retaliation. Some said to forget it, that it had been too long, that bringing it to light would only complicate things. And it was this complacency, this fear of shaking up seemingly stable structures, that prevented the letter from reaching where it should have, the center of truth. When it was finally presented as new evidence, the case was already buried in the majority's memory. The accused man had already served time. His reputation had been destroyed, his mental health weakened, and those involved in the trial had already moved on with their lives. The system, which should have been willing to reevaluate its own errors, chose institutional silence instead. It preferred not to reopen wounds. The letter began to be treated as a curiosity late to the game, rather than a key to a new beginning. But for those who lived the pain firsthand, it was much more than a piece of paper. It was the only chance for real transformation. The question that echoes is, who benefits when the truth is kept hidden? And what does this reveal about the mechanisms that prefer to protect narratives over people? The story of this forgotten letter is not an isolated case. Unfortunately, it is far from it. Judicial error is not merely the result of malice or negligence. Often it stems from something more subtle and perverse, the way our minds operate under pressure. There are several psychological phenomena that explain why innocent people are convicted, even when everyone believes they are doing the right thing. One of them is confirmation bias. When once an idea is formed, everything that appears is interpreted to reinforce that idea. It's like wearing glasses that distort reality and only sees what confirms what you already believe. In the case of the condemned young man, this became evident. From the beginning, he was seen as the likely culprit, and from there every detail was interpreted through that lens. His silence was seen as deceit, his difficult past as a sign of deviance. Even the fact that he didn't react in anger was used against him. It's as if all the pieces of the puzzle were forced to fit, even if they didn't. This type of error is fed by a dangerous combination of social pressure, emotional narrative, and desire for closure. Three forces that, together, can completely distort the perception of truth. Another factor that comes into play are false memories, especially when witnesses are exposed to assumptions or comments before giving their statements. Science has shown that our memory is not a faithful recording of facts. It is malleable, influenceable, and editable. And in environments where fear, pain, or anger are present, it is even easier for recollections to turn into certainties that never existed. It's frightening but real. Many convictions are based on accounts that seemed reliable, but were constructed under the emotional impact of the moment. And when public opinion enters the scene, the scenario becomes even more complicated. Prosecutors, jurors, and even judges are human beings. They also feel fear, anger, a desire to please or to show they are delivering results. In cases that gain attention, there is an almost symbolic need to show that something is being done. This creates what experts call the tunnel effect. The focus is so narrowed on one hypothesis that all other possibilities cease to exist. This is how many innocents are swallowed up by a system that should protect them, but, at that moment, is more concerned with image than with justice. Now I want to dive even deeper into this issue, because understanding the mechanisms of error is just part of the journey. What we need to face now is the emotional toll on those who lived this distortion from within, day after day, between bars and memories that no one wanted to hear, entered that prison as guilty in everyone's eyes, even without confessing, even without definitive evidence, and that shaped his entire experience inside. He was not just a number among many, he was the murderer of the girl, as many called him in the corridors. He was harassed, threatened, kept in isolation for long periods, sometimes for safety, sometimes due to forgetfulness. With time, the body gets used to the cell, but the mind, it never gets used to the idea of paying for something it didn't. What kept him going was something hard to name. Perhaps it was the silent hope that one day someone would still listen to his side of the story. Or maybe what remained was merely resistance, a raw way to continue existing despite abandonment. Inside, he developed symptoms that no one treated: constant insomnia, anxiety attacks, and a kind of emotional numbness that prevented him from clinging to even the small moments of relief. Visits became rare, friends disappeared. Even his family, despite their doubts, ended up distancing themselves because they couldn't bear the social weight of shame. And this created a kind of loneliness that only those who have felt it can describe. A loneliness that isn't just being alone, it's no longer being recognized as someone worthy of remembrance. Over time, he himself began to doubt his own identity. When the letter came to light and the story spread, he was no longer the same. There was no celebration of justice, no public apology, only a new wave of silence, now out of embarrassment. Justice didn't know what to do with him. The media ignored him. The case, which had once made headlines, was no longer of interest when the script showed that the villain was, in fact, the victim. The system offered a modest financial compensation, as if that would be enough to erase years of pain. But what he really wanted, and never received, was something simpler: recognition of the truth. The journey to rebuild his life outside the walls was even tougher. There were no jobs, no support network, and the name still carried the weight of the past. Some people, even after the revelation, continued to say, but didn't he have some guilt after all? It's the kind of mark that doesn't fade with a new sentence. It's etched in the eyes of others, in denied opportunities, in spaces that close before they are even offered. And this leaves a deep impact, not just on him, but on anyone who has gone through something similar. In the midst of all this darkness, there is a forgotten element that carries an uncomfortable truth. Why does the pain of those who are innocent seem less urgent than the mistakes of those who accuse them? There's something unsettling about how society deals with error. When the truth emerges, but that truth threatens to destabilize everything that has already been resolved, the reaction is often not relief, it's retreat. An uncomfortable silence, resistance. And this reveals much more about our collective mindset than about the case itself. The truth, when uncomfortable, disturbs structures we don't want to touch. It demands explanations, requires humility, exposes flaws. And in practice, most prefer the comfort of a well-organized lie to the mess that a late revelation might provoke. That's why, so many times, we choose to keep the guilt where it already is, even if we know deep down that something isn't right. Has the accused already been condemned? Then it's better to let it go, reopen the case. It will cause an uproar, it will take effort, it will bring back pain that many want to forget. There's a certain institutional fear of the truth. as if it were too dangerous, because it questions decisions that have already been made. And along with that comes social shame, that uncomfortable feeling of having pointed the wrong finger, of having applauded at the wrong moment, of having believed an incomplete story. At its core, it's easier to blame than to repair. It's simpler to preserve the system than to face the damage, because recognizing the error of an unjust conviction is not just saying we were wrong, it's admitting that justice can fail, that the media can distort, that our certainties can be fragile. This generates a kind of discomfort that few are willing to confront. And perhaps that's why the innocent Freed does not receive applause or headlines. He receives doubtful looks, closed doors, and that cold silence from those who pretend they never saw what happened. But this collective silence has an impact that goes beyond the case. It fosters a culture of denial, where error is treated as taboo and regret as weakness. And in that environment, real transformation never happens. We don't evolve as a society if we continue to hide our own missteps under the rug. The truth only troubles those who haven't yet understood the power it has to liberate. And perhaps deep down, it is precisely this power that frightens the most, because it compels change, to reassess stances, to step out of the comfortable position of easy judgment and dive into the depths of consciousness. There's one last point that closes this spiral of silence with a dry blow. The victim's wish, expressed in words, was ignored. And that says a lot about who truly had their voice silenced in this story. She knew she was in danger, not exactly in a clear way, as if she could point a name and say it was him. But she felt it, a kind of intuition that only those who have lived with true fear understand. In the days leading up to her death, she began writing on small, loose papers, fragments of thoughts, outbursts, warnings. Among them there was one in particular, folded 4 times, hidden among the pages of a book that was next to her bed. It was simple, direct, but carried a strength that no technical report could match. Those words were the scream she didn't have time to let out loud. If something happens to me, don't let them pin this on him. He wouldn't do that. I know. Please listen to me. That was the essence of the message. No drama, no beating around the bush. A plea for true justice. And the most devastating part is to think that even so, this request was ignored. The letter sat there, frozen in time, while outside, the world chose the most convenient version. It's as if her last gesture, to protect someone she loved or trusted, had been treated as irrelevant. And that's not just a failure of the system. It's a social choice not to hear what we don't want to face. Now imagine the weight of this. Someone about to die, perhaps already wounded, taking her last conscious moments to write not about herself, but about another. Someone she knew would be the next to suffer if the truth wasn't told. This isn't just a letter. It's an emotional testament, a direct appeal to our sense of humanity. And if that isn't enough to reopen a case, review a sentence, rethink an error, what would be the saddest part is that even when the letter finally appeared, it was met with distrust. Years had passed, the official narrative was already consolidated, and any attempt to reverse it sounded like a threat to everything that had already been resolved. But this letter didn't seek justice for herself. It sought justice for those left behind, for those who survived being pointed out, humiliated, and forgotten. And even in death she was still trying to speak, but no one wanted to listen. The sound of her truth hit the walls of collective silence and came back, weak, without strength. What this story reveals about empathy, memory, and responsibility goes beyond a criminal case. It's a mirror of how we choose to remember, forget, and, most importantly, silence what must be said. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story touched you deeply. And perhaps, like me, you feel that certain truths can no longer be ignored. So if this type of content makes sense to you, if this reflection has added something to you, subscribe to the channel. Let's continue together in this journey to give voice to what has been silenced, to dig among the shadows for what has never been said aloud. Take a moment to leave the phrase, "I went all the way," in the comments. That way, I will know that you were with me in every part of this story. And that makes all the difference to me. If this video made you stop and think, leave your like. It's a simple way to show that this conversation is worth continuing. Also, check out this other story about the witness who disappeared and that no one knows what happened to. Click and continue with me over there. The story isn't over yet.